Jumping ahead to verse 15. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to him. So at this point now, we have Sarai, who is 76 years old. We move into Genesis chapter 17, verses 15 through 22. Then God said to Abraham, so Abraham's name has been changed at this point, "As for Sarai your wife, you shall not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and indeed I will give you a son by her. Then I will bless her, and she will be a mother of nations. Kings of people will come from her." Then Abraham fell on his face and laughed, and said in his heart, "Will a child be born to a man 100 years old? And will Sarah, who is 90 years old, bear a child?" And Abraham said to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." But God said, "No, but Sarah, your wife, will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. Behold, I will bless him and make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly. He shall become the father of 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you at this season next year." When he finished talking with him, God went up from Abraham. The Matthew Henry commentary suggests the difference between Sarai and Sarah is a very simple one, that both of them mean princess. Sarai means my princess, referring to a single family, and Sarah means a princess, which would signify many families, in parallel to the change between Abram and Abraham, that Abraham becoming the father of many nations. We jump ahead now to Genesis 18, verses 1 through 15. "Now the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre, while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. When he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite of him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, 'My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourself under the tree. And I will bring a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves. After that you may go on, since you have visited your servant.' And they said, 'So do as you have said.' So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, 'Quickly prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes.' Abraham also ran to the herd and took a tender and choice calf and gave it to the servant. He hurried to prepare it. He took curds and milk from the calf, which he had prepared, and placed it before them, and he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. Then they said to him, 'Where is Sarah your wife?' And he said, 'There in the tent.' He said, 'I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah your wife will have a son.' And Sarah was listening at the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing. Sarah laughed to herself, saying, 'After I have become old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord, being old also?' And the Lord said to Abraham, 'Why did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I indeed bear a child when I am so old? Is anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son.' Sarah denied, however, saying, 'I did not laugh,' for she was afraid. And he said, 'No, but you did laugh.'" This is a situation going on in this passage is one of two things. It's either a theophany or a Christophany. Basically what those two things are is when either God, through the angel of the Lord, when you see that in the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord, it's God's presence on earth, or the Christophany being Jesus in his pre-incarnate body coming down in the Old Testament. You see, once Jesus comes down, we never see the term the angel of the Lord, where Lord is capital L, appear in the New Testament post-Jesus. But in an example of each of these is a little bit later on, we see Jacob wrestling with the angel of the Lord. And that's him wrestling with God. We see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being in the fiery furnace, and then a 4th individual appears. That would be a Christophany. That would be a pre-New Testament appearance by Jesus. So in this passage, it's either a theophany or a Christophany, but of these 3 men that come, you have Abraham realize that he is in the presence of God. That's why he wants to wash his feet. That's why he wants to give him a sacrifice. And so when Sarah laughs, it's almost as if she's viewing and saying, "Oh, what good am I anymore? Am I really going to have a child at this age? Is this really even a possibility?" We can look at the passage of Genesis 20, and for saving time, I'm not going to read the passage from 1 to 12, but the exact same thing that happened in Egypt happens again. that at the age of now around 89 to 90, that most likely either Sarah is pregnant or about to become pregnant, that Abraham again says, say that you're my sister, to the king of Abimelech. Here's a lady that I would have to imagine. I mean, I know in biblical times, especially in Genesis, that like pre-Noah, they were living 800, 900 years. At 89, 90, she is still being viewed by both Abraham and the people of Gerar as beautiful, enough that he's worried they will put him to death. And he keeps just knocking down the value of his wife Sarah. Finally, we get to Genesis 21, 1 through 8, and we see, then the Lord took note of Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he had promised. So Sarah conceived and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the appointed time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called the name of his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore to him, Isaac. Then Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old, as God had commanded him. Now Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And she said, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. Finally, in chapter 23, we see that Sarah dies at the age of 127, when her son is the age of 37. And by the way, Isaac doesn't get married till he's 40. So she doesn't see any of this great nation or any of that happen. Abraham lives for another 38 years after Sarah and lives 175 years. And that's, in essence, all that we know about Sarah. We can look at it and say, well, her life, was she successful? Was it good? Was it everything that she ever intended for it to be? And you'd really look at it and say, she lived a pretty ordinary life. She lived a life that had a lot of hurts. She had lived a life where the term barren was placed on her, where there wasn't a lot of hope for her. But ultimately, we see God in play here. We see God saying that there is value. We see God saying that you do matter, because he would come to her at such an old age and say, you're about to become the mother of many nations. But it becomes a promise that she never gets to see. And for many of you in this room today, you could be struggling with this very same kind of issue. Is God, like, I feel like this is what I always wanted, this is who I wanted to be, this is what my plans were, this is what my dreams were, this is what my vision was, and for some reason that fell short. Maybe it was a matter that you lost your mother at an early age. Maybe it's the matter that you never got married. Maybe it's the matter that you're never able to have children. And even as I say this, and it's directed to a degree towards women today because it's Mother's Day, it's just as accurate and just as true to any of us men in the room. Because maybe it's the fact that Mother's Day is a difficult day for you because the relationship wasn't good. Maybe the fact of there's infertility issues within your marriage, but it's the man who is the issue with that. There's so many, or promotions that got passed over. There's so many different things that can cause us to feel like we don't have value. Make us feel like, God, you promised me this, and this is not coming. This isn't fair. This isn't what I asked for. But instead, we have to turn and we have to put the focus on what's God really trying to do and what's God trying to truly set up. Just as I was talking with missions a few moments ago, God has an end game in place. God's end game is that every tribe, every nation, every tongue hear the name of Jesus, have an opportunity to repent, and to have true eternal life forever. That's God's plan. And a lot of times we can allow our plans to get in the way of what God is trying to do and what God is trying to accomplish. Because we get so comfortable that I want this to happen. I want it to happen at this time. I want it to happen in this way. And God, would you just move the way I want to see you move? Would you write the story that I want to see written and not the other way around? I really wonder if we approached life with the true mentality of saying, God, whatever you want in my life, whether it makes me happy or not, have your way. Do what you want in my life. because I trust that you're in control. I trust that your plans are better. Because for all of us, it's easy to just have that mentality of saying, it's just not good enough. It's not what I wanted. But if God is calling us to it, and God has placed us in it, the Bible tells us that God will work all things for good for those who believe in his name. So even if it's not what we want, even if it's not the exact desires of our heart, it's what God has set up for us. And can we trust God and say, God, you know better than me. For some reason this is happening. For some reason you're asking for this to happen. And I'm going to trust you. You see, the very topic of on Mother's Day, and maybe some of you have been in Mother's Day services before where it's stand up and everybody applaud the women in the room who are mothers. And it becomes awkward because there's somebody sitting in the room who is in their mid-20s and they're still hoping to maybe one day get married. Or somebody, a couple who's sitting there saying, we've been trying for 10 years, 15 years, and it's never happened. But when we place our value solely in those things, we're placing our value, our hopes, our dreams in the temporal, in here on earth. When in reality, God's saying, will you trust me that my plans are greater, that my plans are stronger, that they're bigger, and believe that I have great things in store? Because Sarah could have very easily had that attitude of, God, you've let everything in my life. People would say I'm beautiful, but I'm identified as barren. People would say that this could happen and this could happen, but my own husband's saying, act like you're my sister so that I don't have to walk through anything difficult. Then you can look at her and finally she has a child. And she's told, you're going to be the mother of many nations, but she doesn't get to experience any of it. And why? Because she passes away when her son's 37 years old. Doesn't get to see a marriage, doesn't get to see any children afterwards. I think it's interesting that we see Sarah struggling with this issue, and then her son Isaac, when he gets married to Rebecca struggles with infertility, and then their son Jacob and his wife Rachel, they struggle with infertility. You see, it's a topic that we don't like talking about because we're uncomfortable, because the natural progression is two people get married, they have children, and then they're fruitful and multiply, and then their children grow up and their children get married, and then all of a sudden you see this normal pattern that happens, but all of a sudden it doesn't happen. Like, well, is there something wrong with them? And we have some of those attitudes of saying, what's wrong? Why is this not working? Why? Maybe God has a plan that's greater than we can even imagine, and that for some reason, some degree of hardship, something has to happen in order for God's will to truly happen. I believe where's the rose at? Is the rose made its way through yet? It's still working its way, okay. Here's the thing, it's in your day-to-day life. This rose has been passed through everybody. It actually made it back in pretty decent shape. And it's easy to look and say, you know what? This is a nice looking rose. But what happens when all of a sudden something in life just doesn't go the way you want it to? Life beats you up. It doesn't feel fair. You feel like you've been passed around the room from person to person, that like you went through situation after situation, and it just feels like things are falling apart in your life. And some of you are wondering, you're ruining a perfectly good rose. Let me ask you a question, though. As things have fallen off of this rose, has this rose acquired more thorns? It has the same amount of thorns as it did when it started, but all of a sudden, as things didn't go the way for this rose as that it would have intended, you start noticing the thorns a whole lot more. The thorns haven't increased, but the emphasis on the thorns have, because this rose is becoming less and less as I tear off piece after piece. And it's very easy to get to a spot where you're saying, oh, these petals are eventually going to fall off, but those thorns, they're going to stay with me forever. And we can look at it and say, this rose is quickly losing any value. And some of you could very well in here feel like your life replicates this. But here's the beautiful thing, is that when we look at this and we put an emphasis in saying, that rose isn't the way that it used to look like. It got passed around the room, that for some of you, when it passed by, you saw value in it. For some of you, you probably just looked at it and said, yeah, that's a rose, and passed it on to the next person. But here's the really interesting thing that's happening here. Is the petals are coming off. We can look at the rose and say that the rose's value is decreasing. But that's not true. Because if you look down at my feet right now, you start seeing the very thing that we would do during a wedding with a flower girl is throwing petals, flower petals everywhere. The value hasn't disappeared. The value has just changed. And all of a sudden, what looks like it's falling apart to us, God is creating a new value that's even greater. And he's transforming. He's using us to transform to bring new hope somewhere else. And it's really, really easy to say, well, God, that's not fair because look at me. We have to then have the conversation of saying, was it fair that Jesus dies in our place because of our sins? But something that was painful, something that brought hardship to Jesus, he willingly did because he loved enough. Can we take what's our life, or you can say, you know what, I see a lot more thorns than I used to see in my life. I see a lot more struggles than I used to see in my life. But say, God, if you're willing to turn them into something greater, something even more beautiful, have your way with my life. Because our purpose in life is to bring glory to Jesus' name, not to our own name. And that may mean that there may be some discomfort that happens in life. There may be some moments where that doesn't feel fair. But the beautiful thing is that when we get to heaven, it says in Revelation that he will wipe away every tear from your eye. That there will be no more pain. There will be no more sickness. And so in a moment where we can say everything feels like it's falling apart, maybe it's the very things that are falling apart God's bringing back into the restoration, that God is bringing new life to, that God wants to do something new and something great. And it may be a struggle, but all of a sudden, Sarah was promised at the age of 90 that you would have a child. Just because God has given you a promise and it hasn't come to pass yet, doesn't mean that promise is dead. It simply means that God hasn't fulfilled that promise yet. And we need to keep trusting, and we need to keep putting our faith that God is going to take care of what he said that he's going to take care of. That we can look around this room, and as I showed that video in the beginning, you may say, well, I've got my family, I've got my children, and everything is going the way that I would have scripted it, but I still don't feel like I'm good enough. Sometimes it's that matter of saying, you may have children, but you may still feel this way. You may still feel like everything is falling apart. You may still feel like you're not good enough. But that's not how God sees you. When we see something, well, this is broken, this is beat up, this is no good. I mean, truthfully, I'll say this, man, that if you haven't bought a flowers or a present or something for your wife, or that kids in here, if you haven't bought something for your mom yet, I wouldn't go to Kroger and buy this rose. Just being honest. I'd walk in the Kroger and be like, that's not a good rose. But it's easy to look down on this, but when God looks at this, he sees what the potential is. He sees what it was in the beginning. He sees the very thing that he created. And when he looks at you, you may say, I'm not good enough. I've failed. This life hasn't played out the way I wanted to. And God still looks at you and says, you are my child. I love you. I care for you. And God is in the restoration business. He is able to restore and bring new life. Because you have Sarah, who is past childbearing age. She's already went through menopause. And all of a sudden now she is able to have a child. What other way is there but Jesus? If God promises something, if he says, you can do this, God is a miracle-making God. That a God can create the entire universe, you're saying that this one issue in your life he can't do anything about? That's not true. Because God is the one who created everything and made everything. If I can have the worship team go ahead and come on up. Because I want to talk with you guys a little bit. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time of prayer, and then we're going to spend a little bit of time of worship before we leave today. But ultimately, on a day like Mother's Day, it's very easy to say, well, use the rose as an illustration, so that means you're only trying to go after and impact the women in the room. That's not true. Because each and every one of us, there's something in our life that doesn't feel like it's good enough. There's something in our life that feels like we've failed. There's something in our life that God, I would change that if I could, but I can't, and I don't know what to do. Some way or another that we can relate to Sarah in this passage. We can feel like, God, this is not what I would have ever asked for. But as we sang earlier, who does God say you are? It's really easy for you to put your focus on who I say I am, because if I look at myself, I can put myself back in college where I was a perfectionist, that I hated getting up on stages and talking in front of people. I hated even playing solos on my saxophone during recitals, because if I played a wrong note on the first page and I had another 6 minutes of music I had to play, I was thinking about that first mistake, and after I made that first mistake, then all of a sudden my head wasn't clear anymore. Now I'm thinking about the second mistake and the third mistake and the fourth mistake, and everything is falling apart. When God's saying, just let it go. I've forgiven you. I can restore you. I can make you whole. I can help you find your identity. Because if we put our identity in the things of this world that we either have done or we haven't done, the things that we've been successful with or the things that we haven't been successful with, then all of a sudden when those successes go away, then we no longer have identity. There's a reason that all of a sudden if you put your identity in your work and then all of a sudden you retire, then what's my life worth anymore? Our identity needs to be firmly placed in God. We need to realize that God is the one who creates our identity, and whether he wants to keep us as a beautiful rose like this, it would be in a bouquet, would be put in a picture for display, or our life is going to be taken and used and tweaked for some other purpose. Because rose petals at a wedding have just as much value as rose petals on a rose. But in order to get those petals, they had to be removed from a rose. And so wherever you feel like you are right now, whether you feel like I'm the established rose and everything is going great for me in life, there's going to come a time in your life where you're going to go through a trial. You're going to go through issues. You're going to go through a struggle. And when you realize the fact that my identity is not in being the most beautiful rose, my identity is being a child of God and trusting him and putting my faith in him and knowing that he is more than enough for me, and that no matter what happens in my life, I know I can trust God. That the worst things can be thrown at me, but at the end of the day, I can trust God. When we live with that kind of a mindset, we know that God can do anything. I think it's amazing the fact that Sarah laughs at the face of God and says, I'll never have a child. Then a year later, has a child. She names her son Isaac, which means laughter. She names her son the very thing that she did in the presence of God, because for anybody else who looks at her, you'd have to laugh. How else but God in that situation? That a woman named Barren, that a woman who was in her 90s, past childbearing age, was able to do the impossible, because God is an impossible destroyer. He will take things that seem impossible, things that don't seem like that shouldn't work that way, and throw it out the window and say, I've got greater things in store. I've got greater days ahead of you. So often we can get focused in our past. We can get focused on, this happened to me when I was a child. This happened to me when I was a teenager. This isn't happening for me now. And we can get wrapped up in what we think should happen in our life. And when in reality, God's saying, what about me? What about the plans I have for you? What about what I want to do in your life? What if all of a sudden God decided that he wanted to call you to be a missionary? We had a chance on Wednesday morning to sit down at a table during a session and be with a couple who was in their mid-50s, and God just about, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, called them to go to the mission field in their mid-50s. What if that would happen to you? The only way it can happen is by simply saying that, God, I place my identity in who you are, not in who I am. Not my career goals, not my relationship goals, not any of my goals. But God, you direct my steps. You tell me to go. You tell me when to stop. And I'm going to trust you. It may not make sense to me. It may not make sense to anybody else. But I'm going to name this part of my life laughter. Because I'm going to trust it. Even if it doesn't make sense, God, that you're in control. You've got this. I may be the least likely person to be able to persevere through the situation, but God, you're in control and you've got this. I'm going to trust you. So this morning, here's simply what we're going to do. Is that if you feel like in this room this morning that you identify with that aspect of Sarah, not necessarily with the issue that she dealt with, but you identify that something in your life is just not going the way that you expected it to, that you feel like God spoke something to you, or someone spoke something to you, or you had career ambitions or hopes or dreams or whatever it may be, but God, my life is just not going the way I want it to. We're going to spend a little bit of time at the altar. I'm going to ask those of you that, if that's you, I want you just to come up now as I'm talking, and we're going to pray over you. Just like last week we prayed for people who needed healing, I want to pray for people who feel this morning, this isn't a fair shake. This isn't the way I wanted my life to go. So if that's you, go ahead and come on up, and once people have come up, we're just going to surround you with prayer, and then we're going to worship. Because that's all I know to do. That if things aren't going the way that I expected, things aren't making me happy, I'm going to give it to God, and then I'm going to worship Him, and I'm going to trust Him. That He's in control, that He's got my back, and it may never look the way I want it to. But I trust that God is a miracle-working God, that His plans are better than any plans that I have. So everybody else, if you don't mind, just coming up and surround these people that have come down to the altar, and let's just pray over them, that God's best is still in store for them.